This is a meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The meeting is called to order at this time at 7:07 p.m. on April 10, 2007. The board consists of 5 members and 1 alternate. Alternate takes place in full discussions of the board and becomes a voting member in the absence or conflict of interest of a regular member. This evening, Betty Hollow is not here, so we have present John Golsey, Roger Gruser, Greg Lavelle, and our alternate, Hector Flores, is full member this evening. I'm Muriel Frederick, chair. Also present this evening are zoning administrator Steve Pearson, Paul Eschenbacher, our acting secretary, and Michael Miller from the City Law Director's office. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair names and states the case, or describes the case. The zoning administrator will cite the specifics of the refusal. The appellant or a representative will state case for granting the appeal. Testimony next is taken from those who support granting the appeal, then those who wish to speak in general comment, and then those who support denial of the appeal. Following all testimonies, the board will receive concluding remarks from the appellant. Discussion from the floor then will be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. Under Athens City Code 230910C, under Athens City Code 230703B, the board has the power to grant such variances from the code as will not be contrary to the public interest, so that the spirit of the code shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Athens City Code 230910C requires that variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the evidence provided to it that each and every one of the following 6 criteria are met. Number 1, practical difficulty or undue hardship. There must exist a practical difficulty or an undue hardship caused by exceptional circumstances or conditions pertaining to the specific piece of property. Number 2, exceptional circumstances. There must exist exceptional circumstances or conditions applying to the property or its intended use that do not in general apply to properties in the same zoning district. Preservation of equal property rights. Must be determined that literal interpretation of the code would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity, while granting the variance would not convey special privilege. Number 4 is the minimum variance. Must be determined the variance is the minimum required to make reasonable use of the property. Number 5, absence of detriment. It must be determined the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties, nor materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest. And the last, not of a general nature, the variance sought must not be of a general or recurring nature such that the situation would be more reasonably handled by changing the law. The board is empowered also to hear and decide applications for conditional use, substitution for non-conforming use, temporary uses, and appeals where it's alleged by appellant that there's an error in the decision made by the zoning administrator regarding enforcement and interpretation of the code. Any person who's aggrieved by the decision of the board may file an appeal to the Court of Common Pleas. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the board's resolution to the appellant. There are 4 cases on the agenda tonight. Number 0705S for numbers 7, 9, 11, and 13 Foster Place, zoned R2. Greg Chapman is the appellant. Number 0706S for 399 Richland Avenue, zoned B2. McDonald's USA is the appellant. Number 0503C for 34 Curtis Street, zoned R1. Scott Grady is the appellant, and number 0707V for 8 Clark Street, zoned R1. Joseph Girolamo is the appellant. The board is required by law to take testimony under oath. Anyone wishing to speak this evening, please stand to be sworn. Do you swear the testimony you will give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Okay, first case, 0705S. Steve, for Foster Place, could you give us the specifics of the refusal for this applicant?
Try not to hit the microphone.
It's a little driveway kind of thing. It's a driveway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to,
It could be fixed tonight, I believe. You have to all of this back.
I think they've run into trouble with the tree commission if they try to
Yeah.
put it back there.
It's kind of a flat.
My name's Steve Pearson. I'm the zoning administrator for the city of Athens, Ohio. The first case is regarding 7, 9, 11, and 13 Foster Place owned by Mr. Greg Chapman. You have some photographs there of the existing condition. Foster Place is a one-way street that comes off West Union and makes a turn, finally comes back out on Smith Street, close to the HDL Center. My understanding is it was an old neighborhood constructed by someone who had a business in the area. They lived in like the main house that's out on Union Street. And then these other houses were, I guess you call them company houses. People that worked for the company lived in those houses. Mr. John Valentor is the architect that drew those plans up, and he's the one that I dealt with mostly at the beginning of this situation. I told him that he, as the agent for Mr. Chapman, and Mr. Chapman had the option of approaching the board in two different manners. One was to come and ask for a variance for parking. The other was to request a substitution of a nonconforming use for a not more objectionable nonconforming use. And Mr. Valentor chose to go the nonconforming use route. Variances have to be refused, and then you have to go through your findings. Substitution of nonconforming use is under original jurisdiction of the board. I neither approve or refuse. I simply forward the information to the board. In this particular case, right now there are 4 structures there on 4 individual lots. Each of them has a rental permit for a maximum of 3 occupants. For the whole total there, though, there are only 2 parking spaces for, in theory, 12 people. 2 spaces for 12 people. This is an R2 zone. Part of the application or part of the proposal is to take 2 of those now single unit structures and convert them to duplexes. One is at 7 Foster Place, the other's at 13. So the substitution will be, there'll still be 4 structures, but a total of 6 units instead of 4. Instead of a total of 12 people, in theory, there will be a total of 18. And instead of 2 parking spaces, there will be a total of 13. Part of the request for the substitution, though, is to also substitute some additional nonconformity. That particular nonconformity being parking in front of a structure where parking is not allowed, and driveways wider than 20 feet. The code in R1 and R2 zones limits the access point to a parking area to 20 feet. The proposal, as you can see from the drawing, essentially will remove the existing retaining wall, move it back 20 feet. Parking will be head-in directly off Foster Place. So that's how the 13 parking spaces are being created. Mr. Chapman was before the board a couple, 3 years ago, right across the street. There's an indication on the corner there where Foster makes a turn of a new building. Mr. Chapman came in. He had 2 buildings on one lot, which is a nonconformity. You're only allowed to have 1. And he wanted to substitute the structure that's there now for what he had before. And the board, in that particular case, did approve that substitution to go from 2 buildings to 1. And I think there were some setback variances on that, too, that were required. So there's, In addition, there's a proposal for demolition of 2 buildings with this to reconstruct single units into duplexes on those 2 buildings on the end. There are no particular findings for substitution of nonconforming use. The board simply has to find that it's not more objectionable. They also have to find that the uses proposed are permitted in the zone. In an R2 zone, duplexing is permitted, parking is permitted. So that's another one of the criteria of the 3. And also, there can't be any substantial structural alterations unless the board, by resolution or by your motion, also acknowledges the fact that the driveways are wider than 20 feet and the parking is in the front setback, in front of the structure, where parking is prohibited. Besides that, if you have any questions, I do want one more thing to clarify. Mr. Goldzad told you that I thought there was an alley that went up along 7 Foster, and there is not. I'll show you the...
There's an old driveway up there, though.
There's a little driveway that goes up. What this drawing illustrates right here. Here's the lots in question. And there's a little drive that comes up right here, but there's not an alley. Right there, coming up.
Here's a picture of it.
Everyone's been there,
Yeah,
right?
owns quite a bit of property in that area, including where that little driveway is at. But it's not an alley. Public alley.
But the driveway is part of the property.
It's part of a property in Mr. Chapman's ownership that's adjacent to these particular ones.
Steve, the proposal still is non-conforming, and I had a hard time to establish a basis for determining that if it's more objectionable or not. I think this new proposal, it sounds to me like it's more objectionable than what it is now.
Mm-hmm. From my reading of the code, there are no standards for which the board measures if something is, not more objectionable.
Be a matter of opinion.
And that will be part of your discussion that I think that you should have about what's there now and what's proposed. Is what's proposed more objectionable than what's there right now?
Run through the driveway thing again. I'm not clear on where the driveway, I didn't see any driveway.
Any portion of the road where the curb is removed requires an opening permit from the Service Safety Director. And the zoning code says that portion of the point of access to get to a parking area is limited to a maximum of 20 feet.
Okay, and the whole thing would require a curb cut, so the whole thing becomes a driveway.
As indicated on the drawings. If it shows a complete opening across there, yes.
I see, okay. That's what I needed.
So, and I guess kind of address what Mr. Golsey said, you'll have to determine if, part of your determination, I think, would be that what you have there now is potentially 12 people with 2 parking spaces. Is it more objectionable to have 18 people with 12 parking spaces?
Right now, there's actually 6 people with 2 parking spaces, because that's all that's occupying that property right now. The other 2 houses on the house on either end is not occupied, right?
Those properties, I don't know for sure. I know the one at 7's not occupied. I'm not sure about 13. Although Mr. Chapman does have in place approved rental permits.
Those 3 are all occupied.
For both those properties. So even though they may not be occupied at the moment, there are permits, rental permits in place.
They could be remodeled and occupied.
Right. The 2 in the middle, as you can see, if you went up there, or if you looked at those pictures, Mr. Chapman has in the past remodeled the 2 in the middle. Essentially just remodeled what was there.
Yeah.
In this particular case, rather than remodel the 2 on the ends, he would rather demolish them and construct duplexes, which is a permitted use in the zone.
Okay.
Right now, the parking ratio, in theory, is 1 parking spot for every 0.166 persons. The proposal is to have 1 parking spot for every 0.722 persons. The parking requirement is 1 for 1. I guess that's an additional thing. The the required parking rate is 1 parking spot for every person. This proposal will go from .166 per person to .722 per person.
So if this is the case, why people just come in here, not ask for a variance anymore, just ask for a substitution? It just seems that it's more lenient to come up with less number of parking spaces than if this was a variance, we would have said no, probably most likely, because you need 1 for each person. But now this interpretation of us for substitution, which, you know.
It doesn't always fit that you can substitute.
Yeah.
But in this case-
There's an existing situation there which is non-conforming, the lack of parking.
And
That's the nonconformity.
They lack 10 places now, and it only lacks 6 if they do what they have.
So there exists right now a legal non-conforming use, and that would be occupancy of a building without the required amount of parking. That's why I'd mentioned previously that I offered the appellant and/or his agent the opportunity to appeal to the board in 2 different manners, and they selected the manner in which they wanted to present the case.
Across the street, there's parking area there for other houses in that area. Are there any spaces available in there?
I'm not sure if any of those are deed restricted to other properties or what that particular use those parking spaces might be used for. Mr. Chapman's here tonight. He'll probably be able to clarify that for you. Anything else?
Anybody got any further questions? Something else may come up later, but
Okay.
at the moment, thanks. We're ready to hear from the appellant, I believe. Okay.
I think I can probably address some of the questions, concerns you have.
You'll state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Greg Chapman, 5 Arden Place, Athens.
Thanks.
And yes, I was before you. It probably was 4 years ago for a substitution. And there are some new faces on the board. There's a couple that weren't involved in that, but as Steve pointed out, we took a situation in nonconformity, having more houses on the lot than was allowed. We had setbacks that were minimal, and we increased setbacks, we increased parking, we decreased the building to 1 and made it much more conforming. So I guess in that sense it was certainly not more objectionable. And I don't know if it has any bearing on the case, but it just
It came out good.
this is what we began with and what we ended up with in that case. In another, I think,
No-brainer.
well, it's similar. The 7 Foster is probably a similar quality of house as what those were. 13 is not quite as bad, but it's still deficient in its functionality. It's a house that I have renovated some, but it's just it's an older home. It's tough to make it as energy efficient and tight and nice as you would like.
It's nicer. Came out nice.
I think there's one, the nonconformities, of course, is the parking on the 4 houses in question. Another nonconformity is also setbacks. 7 Foster doesn't meet front setbacks. 13 Foster does not meet side setbacks. So you can see the illustration of the footprint of 13, which would be the 4th house down from the corner. Those are not addressed.
Maybe this one right here.
Right. This is
But
7.
it doesn't show the existing setbacks.
Oh, it doesn't on this?
This one right here.
Okay. Currently, 7 sits pretty much right up on the road. Again, I have pictures and I have better. But it does also bring in conformity, the setbacks. So just another, yeah. This drawing he did shows the outline of 7 and the 13 where it comes right over to the side. You can, in the dotted footprint. So it's another area where we're bringing it into conformity.
This one here that I had already has that
You already have that?
information.
Okay, then you do have. just point that out, that's another, becoming less objectionable by bringing it in conformity.
That
and
one's a little
setbacks.
clearer, but this
Yeah,
one, once you
okay.
understand, it's.
Okay. I guess my property, which I obtained it all at one time, I do pretty much treat it like a unit development. It's regular, rather than individual houses, rather than a planned unit development. My goal is it's kind of a planned unit redevelopment. Take what I have and make the best I can with it, which I've been doing over the years, working with it. The parking that I have done, which is shown across the street, I mean, it was not done to meet any new construction. It was just done because it's an amenity I needed with the rentals. So that parking I do use for people that even currently live across the street. Right now, my parking, I currently have, I count active bedrooms. Right now over there, I have 48 active student bedrooms. I have a couple non-student, but I just figure my student, and they have parking anyway. And I have, with all the parking that I have over there, right now I currently have 45 parking spaces for those 48 students. So with what I've done, I'm real close. With this proposal, it would, rather than 48 active bedrooms, I would have 54. But with the addition of 13 parking spaces, I then would have, rather than 45, I'm going to have 58. I'm going to have 4 more parking spaces than I have students, looking at it as a whole.
So can some students from some different building come and park in here, or?
That do not rent from me?
Yeah.
I do not rent parking spaces to other people.
So they can park in any of these parking spaces?
My parking spaces, my students, they get a hang tag for my tenants, and it's patrolled and towed. And yes, I do get people that don't belong there. As you know, it's like a vacuum.
Yes, it is.
People in the neighborhood, which, like I said, with this, I will have a few. I currently, right now, with the students I have, I've always been able to offer parking. I'm so close. Not everybody has a car, and I've always been able to have a parking space for anybody that needs it. Currently, right at the moment, I think I have 2 vacant, maybe
Yeah.
3.
So in theory, if every single person were home, they could still have a couple of guests and have them have a
Well, I'm
place
going
to park
to,
their
when you look
cars.
at it as a whole, with this proposal, yes, I'll be adding 6 more people, but I'll be adding more parking spaces than that. So yes, I'm going to be on the excess side of parking.
Okay.
So I think it works out pretty well.
Yes. Okay.
I guess another little, maybe a good advantage to this, if you've been over there, you notice I do have parking right off this, which was that way when I bought the property, so I didn't have to get permit to put parking on the left-hand side. I've got now 6 spaces just to the left in hard surface parking, and it will just be like that on the other side. But in doing the other side, right now there's a little bit of a problem with the turning radius of that alley. The recycling truck, the garbage truck,
It's
all
a
have a
very
difficult
narrow-
time
It's really
making that
narrow.
turn.
Yeah.
And you've been up there, you can actually, you can see where cars have actually hit that wall. We've had a few people going a little too fast through there, and they've put some dents in that wall. And plus there are exposed gas lines. Those yellow lines are natural gas that come up exposed.
Oh.
So in doing this, it will basically open up the radius of that turn, because we're going to go back about 22 feet or so. So the truck doesn't have to worry about banging right into that wall.
Just the folks parked out there.
Yeah,
So it'll make it more accessible.
absolutely.
Like money every time.
No, I mean, we will have, there'll be like I said, 2 or 3 feet, because cars are not 20 feet long. I don't know what
No,
is a car on average.
not these days anyway.
No,
Back when I learned to drive, they were.
Long beds to Volkswagens.
So that shows the parking that I do
20-foot long
currently
curves.
have on the other side of the street, which will be, I said, very similar. And,
It's an incredibly tight curve, yeah.
well, a few years ago, I actually, the trucks were about finding it impossible to make the turn, so what did I do? I gave the city basically an easement, or
Yeah,
we increased the radius of that turn. I gave the city a right-of-way or an easement or something.
Yeah.
I gave up a little land to improve it, and it is
here.
improved,
there.
but it's still where the trucks have to make 2 or 3 stops and back up and turn around. So it does,
Drive
Well,
up over the
with-
curb, there was a big wallered out mud hole.
With
right there in the
regard to-
corner. So
yeah.
Mr. Chapman granted the city an easement
so that,
to move the curb radius.
this tree,
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen with that tree with all this construction?
it'll go,
Huh?
it'll go.
That tree's on its way out, is it?
It's too,
It's
old
a-
sycamore like that, with
It's on
the
its way.
branches that fall out of there, it would be a hazard to the property.
Okay.
You
Tree
plan
commission-
on replacing the trees anyway?
We can put another tree in there, but yeah, that's just to have,
Yeah,
it's
you
humongous.
probably ought to make sure that the tree commission knows what your plans are, because they're going to be,
Hmm.
I happen to have a question. I just wanted to know what blue spots meant, so I asked a member
I
of the
don't know.
tree. It means that it's scheduled for trimming by the, the power people. So AP is going to trim this one sometime soon. That's what that little blue dot means. But I needed to know, and I called somebody in the tree commission to ask, so they know the tree's there, and they know that there's something happening with it. So,
Well, it will not be on where the footprint of the house, it'll be back from there. But,
yeah.
But I think that'd be better suited with some newer trees than
Yeah.
that.
They will be wanting to see what your plans are for the trees. That's what they do.
On this illustration I have, you've got several
They
trees
all have to back up.
indicated.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
front of the
they're gonna
house.
have to back out
This,
into the
these
street to
can't be
get out.
here, there's
Just
actually,
pull
and
straight in
it's,
and then
he
pull
corrected it
straight
on
out.
this one, there's a garage that sits there, so
But,
so you need to look at this one.
it
There's
is a very, very
garage that
narrow
straddles these
street,
two
and
lots.
cars do not, or they shouldn't go crashing through here at any kind of speed, so
At some point.
I don't
it's
think
almost
so.
a private road, it's so
wish.
small.
I don't, it would be, I would love to have it moved, but I don't think they would do that for me.
What?
Utility pole.
The utility
Moving the
pole?
utility pole. In front of 13, there's one, which if it wasn't there, I actually could do another parking space, but
Being that you're setting back the wall, the retaining wall, you might request, they might be able to move it or put it underground. At that point, you're done. You dig the hole.
You don't ask, you don't get. They could do.
Give them the right to say no.
so that's just another little, what it does for opening up the road, just another little,
But, yeah, all this. There's going to be utility poles all in the way. Okay.
It would be nicer if they put all these poles underground.
Wouldn't it be?
I did notice that
All the
one
time.
retaining wall, it's,
Pretty little area.
doesn't
Yes,
appear to
it
be
is a
real
nice area.
stable.
And it would be a lot
It's
nicer
already-
with poles and
the brick,
gone.
Yeah.
yeah. The mortar's deteriorated and, yeah, it's crumbling,
Something's gonna have to be done there
yeah.
in the near future.
Okay, well, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, we may be calling you back if we have any, but it
Okay.
doesn't look like it yet. Is there anyone here wishing to speak in general comment on this? Or in opposition? Or support first, I guess, or opposition? Steve, did you have anything additional you needed to say?
I did have one other thing, and that's in the tree reference that you made. If Mr. Chapman is successful in obtaining this substitution, when he actually applies for the building permits, according to the landscape ordinance, there's a requirement for 1 large or 2 small shade trees for every 30 lineal feet running along the parking area. There's also a requirement for a tree per unit. So if you whatever the distance is across there, you divide it by 30, and that'll tell you how many trees are required to shade the parking area. And also, there's a requirement for one tree to be planted for each unit, so that'll be the parking trees and then the
Bunch of
unit
trees.
trees also.
So a whole
But
bunch of
there'll be a
trees.
landscape plan submitted if Mr. Chapman, or a submittal will be required if he's successful in this
I see.
request for substitution, to clarify about the trees.
Okay.
You know, one more question. Is there any code that says you cannot back up on a street? Because I know there was one of my neighbors on Richland Avenue got ticketed because she was backing up and then going, you know, is that any code on that specifically?
I'm
that
not
you know
familiar
of?
enough with the traffic code or with the policies and procedures of the Athens Police Department about backing out onto a street. I do know that in R1 and R2 zones, stacking is permitted. So unless you back into your driveway, you're always, and pulling out front ways, straight out, everyone's always backing out onto the street.
In R1, we
residential
all have
zone.
to back out. I back
Yeah.
out every day. So
Yeah.
does my neighbor Rick Mayer.
Yeah.
So the difference, I think what you're maybe trying to get to is starting in R3 zones and all the business zones, every parking space has to be accessible. In other words, one car doesn't have to move to let 10 cars out. So there's an accessibility requirement in R3 and then all business and manufacturing zones. There is not an accessibility requirement in R1 and R2 zones.
Okay. Well, these certainly look accessible, so, thank you. Does anybody have any, well, perhaps there'll be questions as we discuss this. We don't have to make a motion and then go through findings, but,
There's no findings, yeah. It's not
but
about
we do need to, I believe,
make a motion.
make a motion to grant this substitution. Would anybody like to craft that? And I think at that point, we could discuss it. I would think that would be the easiest way, since we're
Yeah.
accustomed to doing it that way.
No, I can do that.
Okay.
I move to grant to their request for a substitution of a non-conforming use of a I'm sorry. Let me start all over again. I move to grant the request on case 0705S, Zone R2, 791113 Foster Place, appellant Greg Chapman, to grant for his request a substitution of a non-conforming use of a not more objectionable use to substitute 4 structures containing a total of 4 units and 12 total occupants with 2 parking spaces, with 4 structures containing a total of 6 units and 18 total occupants with 13 parking spaces, parking to be located in the front of the structures where parking is prohibited.
Okay.
I second.
All right. So is it the feeling of everyone on the board that this non-conforming use that's being suggested, is actually less objectionable than the situation as it stands, where we have these 4 buildings that currently are grandfathered with only 2 parking spaces, and will actually be increasing the number of parking spaces, but will be increasing at a greater number the number of units. But since the appellant did testify that on the whole, in this general neighborhood, he will be providing more parking than is required.
But
even
the
though-
property also could be developed with less people and more sufficient number of parking spaces.
I think the appellant said there's extra parking spaces across the street that's way under the 250. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like walking across the street.
Right, there is parking directly across the street from these buildings already, which is what they're currently using, I
Right.
believe.
And he said
Well, the
that-
thing is that if they sell this entire complex to somebody else, and these people may say, no, you can't park here anymore, then this guy is, I mean,
No, that would be a problem.
as long as this stays in the same ownership, that's valid. But what if this part is sold separate to somebody else?
Then, if it were sold separate, then you'd be 6 short in parking. That's true. And there is no place to park on the street.
Well,
On
if he
the
sells
other-
them off now, there isn't gonna be any places to park either.
That's true. The situation is actually worse right now than it would be after it was developed. It looks to me, anyway, from that standpoint.
Well, Steve, could we put a stipulation on that if it's sold or so forth? Or we can't do that?
You can do whatever you want.
Stipulation concerning what?
Parking, and if he sells off the property, they'd have to come back for more parking spaces, or unless they get some parking spaces across the street.
I believe that the zoning code says that in any case that the board considers, they may attach conditions to safeguard the, I can actually,
Well, they are not saying that we are providing the additional 5 across the street in here. I mean, he stated that, but they are not saying legally, I mean officially, that
Yeah.
they're going to be using 5 other spaces in the neighborhood for those 4 property.
Yeah, this is only sort of unofficially, sort of casually being used as parking for these units right now, is what you're concerned about.
Right.
And you'd like to make it more tied to the,
Yeah,
tied to the property.
Concrete.
Yeah,
So, if this is a different ownership, then they have to find maybe 5 other lease them maybe somewhere else. Or
yeah. But that is, in your experience, Steve, is there any precedent for setting up something that way? Is there some way that it could be administratively handled that you see? Or,
well, for example, you have a case here coming up tonight that was a conditionally permitted use, and the board attached several conditions to that permit. And that's one of those conditions was that the appellant reappear before the board tonight 2 years after the conditional use was issued. So the board has done things like that before. Under the section, powers of the board, appellate jurisdiction, it says, "The board may attach such conditions regarding the location, character, and other features of a proposed structure or its use that it may deem necessary in the interest of the furtherance of the purposes of the zoning code and in the public interest." So I came pretty close to quoting that one exactly. So I believe
Okay.
the board can attach conditions to any case that they consider in order to further the purpose of the code and further the public interest.
okay. Yes, this is, please do, come on up, though, so that you'll be sure to be heard. Okay.
In talking that, I'm just thinking that when you look at the plans, you have 9 Foster, what is not conforming currently with no parking. If that were sold off, it's conforming, it has parking. If 11 Foster, it has 3 spaces on that lot. If 11 Foster were sold off, it's conforming, it has parking, which it does not now. If 13 were sold off, it would have 3 parking spaces for 6 people. It would be back to where it is right now, 3 with 0. 7 Foster, the same thing. So
Well,
if it were sold off,
yeah.
actually, there's a gain in the 2 are totally conforming.
Well, then you have to
And
specify which parking space is going with which house, there's 4 different lots in there, right?
Well, it's shown on the drawing. There's 3 parking places for each of them, and they go with the, I mean, they're being created on the property.
Mr. Chapman, that's true for a lot of houses in Athens because, it's been grandfathered, their houses, they don't have any parking. If they want to sell it, they have to provide parking. So,
If you want to sell it.
there are many, many houses in Athens that don't have any parking because they were grandfathered, but if they want to sell the house, then they have to provide parking for the tenants.
No, I don't
The only
think
time
so.
that you have to provide parking when there's a non-conforming parking situation is if you propose to rent the house. If I live in a home and it has no parking and I sell it to an owner-occupant, there is no
Well,
requirement for
I'm
retrofitting
talking
the
about the
parking.
rentals, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
There is a retrofit parking requirement if you propose to convert a structure to rental purposes that has no parking. There is no such requirement if the property is just going from owner-occupied to owner-occupied.
Yeah, but this is rentals anyway, so.
Right, that's why I wanted to clarify that.
Okay. So, basically, I,
One other thing, too. Sale of a rental property can occur, and the legal nonconformity, say pertaining to parking, continues. Legal nonconformity goes with property and not with persons. So if Mr. Chapman would sell off one of these structures that has no parking right now, the permit would still be valid with no parking.
so it's in grandfathered status as it stands, which is only a couple of parking places for all of these buildings together. And the proposed changes would provide each of the buildings with 3 parking places, which would make 2 of them conforming just straight out according to code, and leave them, the other 2, the remaining 2, in a better state than they currently are, is the way I see it.
Well, you're gonna have 18 occupants.
Now, the only thing is that,
Altogether, that would be about, what, 3, there's 6 units, right? 6 units, that would be 3 per unit. So each unit this unit, is 6 people in there, 6 over there, that's 12, and 3 and 3.
yeah, we're short
So-
6, we're
Yeah,
short
So you're
6,
still short of the,
we're short 6. Now, the way around that, of course, is if each of these buildings were, instead of becoming duplexes, were becoming single. Yeah, so it was 3 beds for each one, then it
That
could
is
be,
okay.
and if this were a variance request, we'd be discussing that. But it's not. So I'm not sure where that leaves us, but it looks like it would be an improvement.
Sure does.
Do we need further discussion, or can we call the question?
Do we need to discuss this further?
Just
Do you have anything
vote,
further
I
you'd
guess,
like
yeah.
to say? No.
Then I call the question.
That sounds like a plan to me. Roger, as it stands, would you favor this development?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would say yes.
Yes.
I'll say no.
Well, I think I would say yes also, partly given what we've already seen of what you've done in the past.
Sure
It
has.
gives me a
That's true.
lot more confidence. And I vote for it also, so you have your, well, not your variance.
Substitution.
Your substitution of a non-conforming use for a less objectionable non-conforming use. So much easier to say variance. Okay. Our next,
Anything you guys
I
want to
guess we
give me
could,
on that case? Want to recycle or anything like that?
well, first of all, this. There you go. Let's see, do I have, yes, you may have this back. And you really do recycle it, right? It doesn't go in the trash or something. You're a good
He's got a
boy.
seal on
Office of
it.
Code Enforcement, the City of Athens participates in the recycling program.
I'm very proud to hear you say that.
He
It
keeps
makes
it-
me feel good to be an Athenian.
Keeps it all in the back room. Back
Okay. All right. Well, our next case then, let's see. I'm missing.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we're done. Our next case is number 0706S, and it's from 399 Richland Avenue, and we're looking for another non-conforming use, for a not more objectionable non-conforming use for a drive-through restaurant. It's the McDonald's one. Steve, what was the basis for the refusal on this? Actually, that's going to rattle. I suspect it'll sound like thunder in the...
We need them.
Oh, I see. Okay, well,
You get this side. Is that the second one? The first one?
What you have there are some drawings that were submitted by McDonald's
there we go. Okay.
related to a proposal to demolish the existing structure at 399 Richland Avenue and reconstruct another restaurant, exactly the same use.
Yeah,
In the 2003 revisions
this is what we want.
to the zoning code, it included a prohibition in actually it started in B1 zones. In B1, B2, and B2D, drive-throughs are not permitted. In this location in particular here, the zone is B2. So what happened was when the code changed, it created what's called a legal nonconforming use. Some people call it a grandfathering. McDonald's, because the code changed, was not required to do away with their drive-through. But it was, what happened when the code changed was it created a nonconforming use. The sheet in the bottom right-hand corner, I think that's marked 2 of 2, is the existing configuration of the building, the parking, and the drive-through, or the entrance-exit points. As you come down Richland Avenue, there's one it's almost just a single-wide entrance-exit point, closest to the downtown area. As you go down, if you're familiar with that, there's an area then you can turn into, which essentially puts you going into the drive-through window. You go around the back of the building, you
That's where the
stop
cars
at an order
race
kiosk
off
on
the
the back,
street.
come around to the corner, pay for your food, go up to the next window, and pick it up, and then you exit directly out onto Richland Avenue. So that's the existing situation. If you go to the next page, this is what the change that's proposed. So back up a little bit. Any nonconforming use that's damaged more than 65% of its value cannot be returned to a nonconformity. It has to comply. In this particular case, there's a 100% destruction because they want to tear the building completely down. The damage can be by any means, is what the code says. So one of any means is, voluntary destruction also. Just so you know about that part too. Another reason why they're in here for this. The damage is going to be more than 65%. The next page shows what they propose. That first little entrance when you come down Richland Avenue is now turned into 3 lanes. 1 in, 2 out, so that's been widened. As you go down the street, you can see just a continuation of a sidewalk. No more entrance-exit point where it exists right now. To get into the line, and then no more point where currently there's an exit when you come out of the drive-through. There is a proposal, though, if you look further up or further down Richland Avenue, there's going to be another exit point, which is further down and at a greater distance from the one proposed than any of the situation that exists right now. Monday morning, the staff reviewed these plans, and I know particularly Andy Stone, the Director of Streets, was encouraged to see the number of access points diminished from 3 to 2. That was one of the comments that he made. I guess I'll go ahead and, I measured the distance from the curb line at Richland Avenue back to the order kiosk, the way it exists right now. It's about 120 feet. From the point at which access will be gained from Richland Avenue as proposed to the ordering kiosk is about 380 feet is what they propose. So it'll be a much longer distance for cars to get off the public street and onto private property as they're waiting to order and pick up food. Just so you know, too, landscape plans have been forwarded to the Tree Commission for their review already. I'm now in discussions with George Myers at ODNR Floodplain Management Division. That's part of the State Division of Water, because this property is also located in a special flood hazard area. But again, those are things that won't be necessary to accomplish if the board does not grant the substitution. So there's a lot of additional work, let's say, that has to be done other than just this request tonight. To substitute a drive-through for another drive-through in a zone where drive-throughs aren't permitted, essentially the storage area or the on-site distance increasing from 120 feet to 380 feet.
What was the reason that they wanted to do this?
I think they have representatives here that,
Okay.
that can answer
I
that.
should ask that. Oh, I know what the problem is. It's, yeah, I understand that problem. I wondered if that's what it was trying to address. Okay.
Another thing, too, just so you know, they have given me some information to review on signage that I have completed reviews on and will be returning a response to them in writing concerning their signage. There are some possibilities of signage that will meet the requirements. If they choose not to do that, they have the option then to come back to the board and ask for a sign variance. But again, you know, that's just something that's in process right now. Just
So
so
we
you know
don't need
about
to address
too.
that today.
Right. No need to go into all of that if you don't grant the substitution.
Okay.
So basically, the substitution is because they are going to destroy 65% of the building.
100% of the building.
I've had discussions at the, with city prosecutors about this, because there are lots of situations where people have a nonconformity, and they say, well, I want to maintain my old footprint, let's say, that's nonconforming, it's too close to the line. And so I'm grandfathered in on that footprint. Well, yes, you are, until you damage the building more than 65%. That section of the code talks about repair and replacement of nonconforming uses in buildings. And it says damaged by any means. So even though the title is, you know, maintenance and damage, voluntary demolition is one of any means of damage. So that's, right now, that's the administrative interpretation based on advice from the law director's office concerning that particular section of the code.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who is representing McDonald's?
If I use this, where is there a space to put it so it can be seen?
I've got an
Right there's good.
See that okay?
Yeah,
We'll move it over this way a little bit.
yeah.
You're fine with us.
But you'd like to set it up so the camera can get on it too.
Should be fine.
Okay. All right.
Hi, my name is Mark Mox. I'm with McGilvery, DiDiano, and Mox. We are the engineers and surveyors that prepared the plans that you're looking at here tonight. What I wanted to go over was one of the questions you did ask is, is McDonald's looking at rebuilding this particular location? McDonald's does this throughout the country. They look at viable candidates for their rebuild program. They look at a number of different factors when they're looking at it. They look at drive-through flow. They look at the age of the building. They look at the amount of money that it may take to continue to maintain this building with the more efficient mechanical units that are out now, replacing the ones that are on this building. It would actually cost more to replace these than it would be to put new ones onto a new building. So they look at those types of things. They also look at the kitchen equipment that's in there. The new equipment is more efficient. Just the whole design of the buildings are now more efficient for the operations of running the restaurant. And so that's why they look at these as candidates for it. Obviously, there's a number of steps that we have to go through, this being the first one, before we can actually make a determination that this is going to happen. If it, for some reason, we would not be able to receive approval tonight, then we would have to look at other options, obviously, because the drive-through is very, very important to a McDonald's restaurant. I don't know the exact numbers for this particular location, but you can look at sometimes half or more of your business going through the drive-through. So a drive-through is very, very important to McDonald's. They like this location. They think it's an important location to be at. And with the redesign and a new building and so forth, they've actually made a number of improvements over the existing design. And what I can go back to, if I step up here, I'm not going to be able to be heard. Is that a problem?
There's some microphones up in the ceiling, so you should be all right.
Perfect. As was already discussed, the drive-through flow presently is a single-lane drive-through around the back of the building with a single point of ordering right now. What's being proposed is actually a dedicated drive-through lane around the building, but with two drive-through order stations. That does a number of things for the restaurant. It allows to keep the cars from stacking back. What McDonald's has found is that no matter how fast they can make the food and give the food to the people, if you have somebody coming through the drive-through that has a very large order, and you have somebody coming through that just wants a cup of coffee, that can hold up the whole process if the person with the large order is in front of them. So what McDonald's does is they give it the two lanes, which allows someone, if someone is here, to proceed to the outside lane and also place their order at the same time. So two orders can actually be placed at the same time. Yes.
Yeah, this is a great design, but I've never seen one like this. Would there be any way for the people to know that there's another window back there? How are they going to be directed to this next one, the second one?
Right here, at the point where you would choose to go in either direction, there's actually a sign with an arrow that shows that you can go
Either way.
Either way.
Okay.
Right. And then when you get to the point, there's also some additional signs. So there's menu boards that are placed at each location, and also the order stations are placed at each location. And then when the cars proceed around, McDonald's controls who goes first, who will be released to go through the drive-through lane at that point in time. There's also cameras that are placed so that they can see at the same time inside the restaurant who proceeded forward and so forth. So that's how they would keep the orders from being confused and mixed up. Because they start out in a single lane, they split to two, and then they proceed into a single lane again. And it's been working very, very well in a number of different locations across the country. And this is, in this particular market, this is what they look to do whenever possible, whenever they can make it happen. Because it really does cut down on the drive-through lane stacking, and it is able to move cars through much faster. The rest of the development, as was explained also, is to try to put the majority of the parking right now in front of the restaurant, so that the drive-through lane and the vehicles do not have to interact at all. They're able to utilize this area without conflicting at all with the cars. Right now, we have cars on both sides of the building, and anybody on this side actually has to walk through the drive-through lane and so forth with the other way up. So this, actually, when you look at it, it has a number of positive contributions being made to this development, and which is the reason why McDonald's is chosen as a candidate, because it could really improve the situation that's here, and instead of looking at remodeling, they look at the rebuild instead.
I think I saw one today in Columbus that they were rerouting people to go in the perimeter area. They're blocking off, and they would not interfere with the people who are parking in the middle, because there's going to be a lot of traffic going. People are going to be parking, and people have to wait, stop, and it's going to be a traffic problem. But is there any way that you could have done that, or is this too narrow to have a path, a road to go in the, in the outer limit, and then go through the window, and also from the outer and the boundary line?
I'm not sure.
Well, if you can, maybe I can show you in here. Coming in here,
Yes.
and going behind this parking space, and going like from here, and move everything forward, and just walk, drive this way, go through here, and drive this way back, and block it off, and push everything inside the space where the parking is.
Have the parking in the center, you mean, and
Yeah.
having the drive going
Yeah,
around?
the drive would
Probably
be
not
all the way
enough room
around
for
it.
it.
Right.
Yeah. You lose
When
half the
looking
parking.
at that type of a design, one of the critical factors that restricts what we can actually do here is Coates Run. This area through here is actually a slope down over the hillside. So to do anything like that, we'd actually have to pull this forward. And then at the same time, we have, here is a drive-through lane. We also have a bypass lane to go around at the same time. By pulling this forward, that would not allow that, we'd have to get that drive-through lane to be able to come. We'd have for the bypass and the drive-through, they would have to merge at one point. They would have to cross each other. And that would be why we wouldn't want to do a layout like that.
And is this design going to accommodate buses or large vehicles that are coming through, trailers, things like that?
It's not designed
Designed for
to
that.
accommodate that type.
Yeah.
This particular location is not looked at as that way.
Okay.
Is it necessary to take 65% or 100% of the building down?
The structure right now, the way it is positioned, it's actually positioned right through here.
Right.
And when looking at it, the building itself, just structurally, and trying to configure that, is it 65% of the building or 65% of the cost? It would be very, very difficult to try to save a portion of that building and design around it. McDonald's actually uses standard buildings that they've designed for a lot of reasons. One is, in compliance with the ADA accessibility, and in their kitchens, because they have equipment that's being manufactured, it's only a certain size, because they reproduce that kitchen equipment over and over and over again. So trying to do a special building like that wouldn't really work.
What the code says is repair, replacement of damaged buildings. In the event any building or structure with a non-conforming use is destroyed by any means to the extent of more than 65% of the county auditor's true value, exclusive of foundation, it shall not be rebuilt, restored, or reoccupied.
Because of the value, that would actually make it very, very difficult at that point.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. We might wind up with some others, but at the moment not. All right. It's another case where we have a non-conforming use. It's not a variance, so we don't have to go through all the findings. But I think it's easier to have someone craft.
You want to see if there's any objection?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I didn't see any in here, but is there anyone here speaking in favor, in general comment, in opposition? And Steve, did you have anything further that you needed to say in general comment?
No.
No. Thank you. In that case, the comments from the floor are closed, and we're ready to decide what to do here. Getting on, I think if someone could make a motion to grant this substitution to the appellant. Anybody feel like crafting that? You did the last one. You're already experienced. Would you like to do this one?
I don't have my paper here.
Here.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I move to grant I can't find the right
Yeah.
wording.
You did. That's exactly.
Yeah. On case 0706S, Zone B2, 399 Richland Avenue, McDonald's, USA. I move to grant the request for a substitution of a non-conforming use for a not more objectionable non-conforming use to substitute a drive-through restaurant with a vehicle storage lane of 120 feet in length with a drive-through restaurant with a vehicle storage lane of 380 feet where drive-through restaurants are prohibited.
Okay.
I'll second it again.
All right. Not to push anybody around, but this one seems to me fairly self-evidently an
McDonald's
improvement.
must have a drive-through. That's like it's the rule.
Yeah, and well, it's already operating as a drive-through restaurant, and it seems to me that it doesn't make. I can see no advantage to telling them that they can't improve it, particularly that business. It seems like it would get a lot of people off the.
Well, I live right
The street.
down the street there, and I have to go by several times every day, and it's hazardous in the mornings in many instances because
People
of the
getting their
fact that
coffee.
it's such a short.
Yeah, I can see where it would be a great improvement to have that extra.
Like the only
If-
accident
even
I
if nothing
had
else were
recently was
improving.
in front of my place.
So, did
And I guess we
yes.
can't discuss the traffic safety, but I'm sure they will have enough signage in there.
Yeah,
direct
you know,
people.
there,
Well, and
on
Steve
here, it looks
remarked
like
that
there's
one of
all
our-
kinds of directional,
Administrators
provided.
was,
Yeah.
Steve remarked that one of the administrators was
No, we
in
can't
favor
discuss
of
it,
Yes.
that as being an improved.
yes, he did. That was in the beginning, in the presentation, and okay, that being the case, are we ready to vote on this?
Yes.
Okay, let's start at this end,
Yes.
okay? And you will vote yes, of course.
Yes.
I could tell. And
Yes.
unanimously, we are in favor of these changes, so you have your request.
Get it done
Granted.
as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Question, how,
There's a little more to go yet.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff to go. Does this, oh, this means trees too, doesn't it?
yes,
I mentioned that I'd already
Yes.
forwarded the plans.
You're not a tree hater, are you?
I think I said that.
It's just this and the other.
That's going to, that's,
Be
no,
nice
that's
if they can
that's
get it
coming
done
up for the next
quickly.
time. Yeah,
The owner is not here, so
No.
if he was, I would have said something.
yeah. Yeah, the signage will be after they get started on
No, I
this.
mean, this was the other.
The other one.
Hey, leave me
Not
happy.
supposed to have that.
No.
Don't you
Yeah,
mess
no.
with
Been there.
How come it is? I don't understand.
It's a cardboard thing,
Consistently.
but temporary thing.
It's always temporary.
But it's been there on a permanent basis.
Yeah, permanently temporary. Welcome. All right. All cleared away? Then we're ready for case number 3, which is Mr. Grady coming back for 0503C from Curtis Street. And would you like to remind everybody why he's here?
Where did he go?
Oh, he's not here.
Mr. Grady was here and he left the room. I'm not sure where he's at.
Oh, he'll be back.
Oh.
Here he
Oh, there he
comes.
is. Okay. There is a TV going out in the hallway, so.
Oh,
The board previously heard this case in 2005. The way the code was rewritten in '03, if you want to have, if you want to raise goats, chickens, cows, grow vegetables, grow flowers, kind of like a home farming occupation, the code says now that has to be permitted by a conditional use permit. Conditional use permits are also something under what's called the original jurisdiction of the board. When I have an application for a conditional use, I don't approve it, refuse it, I just forward it immediately to the board. In the case of Mr. Grady in 2005, the board found by a vote of 4-0 to approve a request for a conditional use permit for 34 Curtis Street to raise fruits, vegetables, and flowers not for sale on the property. And then there were 5 conditions attached. The first one was that there would be no on-site sales. The second was sales would only occur where retail activity is permitted. The third was the activity would be confined to a single lot as presented in the plans. 4, the installation of a privacy fence would occur at the front of the property. And 5, that the board would review the case in 2 years. So that's why we're here tonight. After that, in July, Mr. Grady came back and he preferred, rather than to have a fence, that was one of the original conditions, that he be able to install, I believe what he called a living screen, some plantings in lieu of the fence. And in July '05, the board found by a vote of 4-1 to request a substitution of a live planting screen as presented to the board for the previously required wooden fence. And then there were 4 conditions attached to that. A portion of the screen is to be a minimum of 6 feet in height. 2, the planting spaced according to recommendations to ultimately block the view of the rear yard. 3, the plantings were to be completed no later than October 15, 2005. And 4, the plantings would be maintained so long as the conditional use existed. So, and I think everyone but Mr. Flores was on the board at the time, I believe, in 2005. So I don't know if there's anything I can help you with to remind you about the case, I'd be glad to do that.
Now, my understanding was that we're simply reviewing compliance, or we don't have to go over the whole conditional use permit again, do we? That wasn't the idea. The idea was just to review compliance.
The resolution of the board, item number 5, said that the board would review it in 2 years. You'd have to go back through the record, I guess, through the minutes to find out why the board wanted to come
I think
have it
was
reviewed in
for
2 years.
compliance,
Be
but
sure that he's conforming.
to make sure
those,
that everything that they
yeah.
said they would do was done.
Yeah, that was our only concern.
Yeah.
And if it
That's
was
what I remember.
conditional use, that can go permanently or what? I mean, we could review every 2 years, but how long this can go on? Forever?
No, we just had the first time we looked at it, we were saying that they needed to come back for us to check it out again in 2 years. This time, when we're checking it out, then presumably we decide whether this ends now, or we do it again in 2 more years. Is that?
That could be your decision.
Okay.
Normally, conditional uses are just granted and there's no
Yeah.
time limit on it. Although the board could, as I mentioned, I read that one section of the code, you can always attach conditions, and that's what happened in this particular
Yeah.
case.
So I think
2
that-
years ago, the board attached several conditions, one of which was to have this review tonight.
There was a lot of, if I recall, neighborhood input on this one, and we were attempting to address concerns. So,
Steve, did you get any complaints from this property at all?
I have not received any written complaints at my office. I believe there was some person who had some concerns who appeared 2 years ago.
I'm not
They're not here tonight.
interested in verbal complaints, because I get those on the street, but written complaints.
Yeah. To my knowledge, there have been no written complaints about the property.
okay.
And to your knowledge, they have been in compliance.
Well, that's what we're going to decide.
I'd recommend that there be some discussion about the substitution of the planting screen, the live
Yeah.
planting screen in lieu of the wooden fence that was required. I think that might be one thing you might want to look at.
I think that was the main reason we had him coming back. The fence was, that was originally approved, was going to be a wooden privacy screen, and it was primarily to address concerns of the neighbors who felt that what was being done there was inappropriate in the neighborhood. And so the living screen was to replace the fence, as it is supposed to be preferable to the fence, at least preferred by the owners. It's my
At the-
recollection. I don't know, Roger, what do you recall? Do you recall why the fence was, why the the plants were substituted for a fence?
I assume it had to do something with economics.
Oh, I think cheaper to put up a fence than it is to put up
Well,
a whole
maybe you
bunch
can
of plants.
explain.
But maybe we can, yeah. Okay.
Regarding complaints, as Mr. Flores had asked if I'd received any, at the time of the original application, there was a petition by 32 people in the area that supported the request, and I have not heard from any of these people that they feel any other way than as
okay.
they indicated on this initial petition for approval, to grant approval.
There was 32 people were in favor, and then there was 1 or 2 people who were not. There was somebody who was not in favor.
Actually, that person was
No,
not
that they
living there.
weren't
He
in
was,
favor,
Oh,
they just
somebody who
wanted
wasn't
to be
even
sure
there.
that they weren't subjected to
Really?
sites that they
yeah,
really
and
wouldn't
was
be comfortable
talking on
with.
behalf of somebody who was.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
But I did talk to a couple of neighbors, and they actually said they had the highest regard for these people, and they didn't have any
That's why
complaint whatsoever.
the
That's
fence
good to
deal
know.
came.
That's good to know.
Steve, may I ask you, how long have these living fences been planted?
They
Two-
were
2 years.
installed, to the best of my knowledge, in accordance with the resolution for substitution, which said no later than October 15th, 2005.
So they've only been there 2 years, more or less speaking.
Right.
So they haven't really matured and filled out.
Well, it's been pretty cold. The weather hasn't been good enough.
May I ask you, or should I wait until they?
Well, he'll be up there, I'm sure.
He'll be coming up.
I'm not sure why, I can't remember exactly for sure why the backyard needed to be screened. They're raising fruits, vegetables, and flowers.
There was some,
There was some
So-
concern
there was
about
some
the
fuss over
greenhouse
the
frames.
The
greenhouses.
neighbors next door, I think, were the ones that were concerned about the appearance.
I think you might be right, Mr. Lavelle, there was, because part of this proposal, there are some, as I recall, there are some movable cold frames, greenhouses.
Right, they were wondering where they'd wind up.
Yeah.
Right. And I believe an officer reported back to me just the other day that at the current time, there are no portable greenhouses there. So,
Any other questions for Steve? No? Okay, thank you, Steve. And Are you ready to make your presentation? If you will, come on up and state your name and address for the record.
Scott Grady, 34 Curtis Street.
Welcome.
Pretty much, if you say it's okay, I'd like to just keep on doing what I'm doing. For the past 2 years, I've been growing vegetables in the backyard, and every Saturday I take them to market. I too haven't heard any direct or indirect complaints or issues. People in the neighborhood seem like they support the activity there, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if I can.
You had a question, right?
When did you you planted these trees about 2 years ago?
Pretty much right after the last hearing, which is when it was agreed upon. I started planting them, which in retrospect was a mistake because many of them died in the summer and had to be replaced, and then some more died in the fall, and right now I've just got one dead one that needs to be replaced. So,
And how tall are you going to let them grow before you start topping them?
Well, like right now they're about as tall as me, and I would let them grow a little taller. Just you said 6 feet, and I think that you'd want them to be a little taller, so you didn't have to look back there at all. So I was thinking maybe about 10 feet. They do grow that tall, from my understanding.
Then they bush.
Yeah, they should. I've never planted these before, but I assume with the spacings that are given, in fact, that's what it says on the card, is if you want to hedge, you plant them 4 feet apart, I believe it is, 4 or 5 feet apart. So that was the intent. And yeah, they sure didn't grow much since I planted them. Hopefully this year they'll take off and fill in quite a bit. I fertilize them in spring.
Didn't we have a terrible drought that
Yes.
year? Yeah.
Summer was
I wouldn't
pretty
have grown
dry. I
either.
watered them every day for
Yeah.
a month or two.
It's probably
but
red clay up there anyway, isn't
It
it?
is pretty hard stuff.
Good stuff.
Yeah, plus his specialty is in vegetables and flowers, so
Yeah.
trees.
And are you, it's filling in where your neighbor who complained, is there a possibility to put some wheatgrass in between there so they can't see your backyard at all? It's just
Staggered.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought of that, and I originally dug some holes, and I planted some in there, and I thought, by the time these grow in, the trees would probably fill in
Well,
the meanwhile.
wheatgrass grows pretty quick.
They
right?
do grow tall. I mean, they're not as thick, and they're not evergreen, obviously. It's a
But
possibility.
Once they fill in, about midsummer, you won't be able to see unless you push the thing
The
aside.
neighbors were notified that there was going to be this hearing, weren't they? If they had any objections, they'd be here.
Yeah.
So
I think
apparently
so.
the neighbors are happy.
I did have one person come in and want to look at the file.
But if they were unhappy, they'd be here.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, I didn't see anything.
I'm happy to hear that he's been
As a
replacing
result,
them as they bite the dust. Yes, it is. That's,
So it sounds like he's doing a decent job.
I got it in the backyard.
Are the movable greenhouse frames no longer there? Is that what I understand?
Yeah, I had used them before, mostly in the springtime to get started. Partially because I figured I'd wait and see how the hearing went. I just delayed that. And for my purposes, growing for market, I didn't find them that useful economically so far. So I'm not sure that I would continue using them for market purposes anyway.
okay. Anybody have any further questions?
Maybe for Steve.
For Steve only, okay. Well, Mr. Grady, I think that's probably all for right now.
Okay.
If you think of something, wave at us.
Okay,
But-
thank you.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, I believe John has a question for you.
Do we just go for 2 more years or permanently or 3 years or what is can we just say it's
What do
okay?
we-
or
What do we decide?
Yeah, it's your decision. I don't know of any case, while I've been employed for the city, that's 13 years, there's never been a condition that I can recall where someone had to reappear before the board, so this is the first one that I have any kind of association with. It's the pleasure of the board, whatever they want to do.
If the neighbors have been happy for 2 years, I don't think we've got a problem.
No.
Like I say, normally conditionally permitted uses are just issued, And unless otherwise specified, they go with a property and not with a person.
Okay, thanks.
So this, we can choose now to extend this for another couple of years or longer, or we can choose to consider that he's complied with the conditions for his permit and just
And just be done with it.
be done with it, yeah.
I'm in favor
it's-
of being done with it.
Anybody?
I'll second that.
Yeah, well, we got a motion and a second for being done with this one, to be real official sounding about it.
I move based on our review tonight,
No further action required.
give the permanent permission for do whatever you're doing.
Yeah, no further action required. Everyone,
second
all in
it.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Okay. I think that, yeah, I think we've pretty well, we're agreed unanimously that you've complied very well and that there's no further action that we need to take, and keep on growing. Thank you very much.
Maybe put some miracle grow on those trees.
Well, I appreciate particularly that you've been so consistent with replacement. I know how difficult that is from having had to do it myself.
And the
and
larger a
things,
shrub
so
is, the more troublesome it
Yeah.
is to maintain it.
they
When you
seem
get
to be
big
doing
ones
well.
like that, they're really tough to keep alive.
Well, but they're, the ones that are doing well are doing very well. Just that, well, there's drought and then there's absolutely no
drought.
water at all, so, okay, all right.
Drought and clay drought.
Clay drought, that's what we get around here. All right, our last case this evening is for 8 Clark Street, and this one is a variance request. And Steve, what was the reason for turning down this R1 variance request? Or request for building, anyway?
I'd like to thank all the members for coming over to the office, so you could look at those big plans.
Yeah,
I appreciate you doing that, rather than have me take those huge things.
Next time, coffee
It wouldn't have
and
worked very
donuts would've
well.
been
Coffee,
nice.
if I'd have known, if I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake.
Oh,
Well,
next time.
if we'd known we were all arriving pretty much within minutes of each other, you could have done it all at once, but,
Yeah, you would have thought we'd have got a couple McCappy meals or coupons. Did you see this house?
This particular case has to do with a property located at 8 Clark Street. On this copy of the tax plat that you have, the intersection at the right-hand side is the intersection at Central Avenue. It's right over by the code office. Right across the street, we see Turl Development Company. That's the old Sheltering Arms Hospital, right across the street. Somewhere along the line, when this subdivision was platted, there was a lot, looks like R2078. On this, it says it says James Finger. Dr. Finger used to live in that house. I don't think he lives there now, though. For some reason or other, somewhere along the line, that little lot, which was part of the backyard of that lot, was split off. I don't know when that occurred, why it occurred, but it's been quite a few decades ago. The lot that was left over, or the lot that was created, is only 30 feet wide and 46.95 feet deep. So nowhere near the minimum 8,000 square feet that would be required today. But again, with the adoption of subdivision regulations and the zoning code, properties like this are called legal nonconforming uses. There is, however, a section in the code, and this is related to parking. If you want to take a property and convert it from owner-occupied to rental, there is a parking requirement. That parking requirement is 1 for each permitted occupant or a minimum of 2 spaces on the lot. There is 1 parking spot right in front of the house right now where parking is prohibited, but again, it's grandfathered there. That spot is partially on the lot itself and partially on the Clark Street right-of-way.
Yeah. That works.
I went to the county auditor's website and printed off the footprint of the building that's there right now. There's a front portion of the building that's 6 feet wide, and then the structure itself is, or deep, 30 feet deep. So of the 46.95 foot depth of the lot, 36 feet of that is actually covered by a house. So there's only, and I'm going to assume because about half that car looks like it's on the lot, the back of the house is probably right on the back property line, or very close. Up until, well, places that convert from rental back to owner occupied, we keep a record of those at the code office. We have a no longer rental file. The last approved permit that we have for that property was approved in 1994. The owner at that time was able to obtain a permit without the required parking because in 1994 parking had not yet become a legislatively mandated requirement. Maybe the appellant can explain this a little more, but I do see in the file some letters sent from the Code Enforcement Office regarding the property and the necessity to obtain a rental permit if they wish to rent the property. I do see in the file that in October I did refuse an application to convert to rental because there were not a minimum of 2 on-site parking spaces. The requested occupancy is for 2 people, not 3. So this is located in an R1 zone. The maximum number of unrelated persons allowed to reside there is 3, but the request is only for 2. I also see a letter in the file from myself to the owner dated October 5th that explains their options. Sell the property to someone who will actually reside there, and then there is no parking requirement because it's not being converted to rental, or appeal for a variance to the board, which is what they've decided to do.
Okay. Thank you. Any
Steve,
questions?
yeah, on parking on the street, if there is no meters, can you just park in there for a long time, or is it a 24 hours limit?
Yeah. The whole city of Athens is posted as you come into town that 24-hour parking is enforced, and we do have one person who's a member of the meter division of the police department who basically does the whole town every day, and I'm sure anybody that lives in town knows that there's pretty diligent enforcement of that law. They'll come out, they have a piece of chalk and a marker, and they mark your tire, and then they come back the next day to see if the mark is moved. And I'm sure they have other ways to determine if you've moved or not. You know, if your car is covered with snow, probably hadn't moved in a day, for example. But anyway, yes, there is very diligent parking enforcement on the street. 24-hour parking, 24 hours is the maximum without moving your vehicle. But again, the requirement is for the parking spaces to be on the lot.
Right.
It's what the section's called is off-street parking requirements. So the space that's there is not off the street. It's on the street right away. There have been cases in the past where if someone wanted to rent a property and they had existing parking that was partially on the right-of-way, they were required to go to city council and ask for a revocable license for use of the right-of-way. Had that situation happen, place down on Richland Avenue. Anytime that you change something and your parking that you need isn't on your property and partially on the right-of-way, you're required to go back and ask for that revocable license.
Has that happened in this case yet?
No, because the board, again, this is just the first step to see if a rental permit or if the board doesn't approve this, there won't be any, we won't go back and say, get a revocable license to park there. There are people that park on the right-of-way all over town. The thing about legal nonconformity is, as long as you don't change it, you know, the status quo is a good thing. But when there's a request to change, then all of these other things kick in. What Grandpa had, you know, if you want to change it, it's changed. You have to meet the new requirements. But as long as you maintain it the way it is, there isn't any problem.
Well, that
Okay.
was a car that was there today.
Well, there was a car there today,
Yeah,
though.
but
It wasn't this car, no.
That's a smaller car.
Well, the car that was there today was fitting, though.
No, it's turn back on.
Came right to there. I
This is
didn't have any
pretty-
problem walking past it. There was still sidewalk. Anyway, that's a pretty good sized car.
Kill that tree.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Steve? Okay, thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
And who's representing Mr. Girolamo? And were you sworn in earlier?
Yes.
You were, okay.
My name's Colin Girolamo. I live at 8 Clark Street, Athens. If it's all right, I'll just read the letter the owner prepared
Okay.
to the board. It's from Joseph Girolamo regarding the rental property at 8 Clark Street, Athens, Ohio. Request for a variance of the minimum required off-street parking spaces. I am requesting a zoning permit for a 2-unit rental with 0 off-street parking spaces. If the general purpose of the zoning code is to maintain a safe and good-looking neighborhood, then granting this variance will be in accordance with that intent. If this variance is not granted, there would be no way for this sound attractive house to fit into the existing Athens zoning code. Granting of this variance would not be injurious or detrimental to the public welfare. The particular circumstances related to this property that require a variance is the fact that the house sits on a proverbial postage stamp. The property lines around this structure are measured in inches from the building. The south property line is 4 feet from the rear of the house. The west property line is 3 feet from the house. East property line is 9.6 inches from the side of the house. I've already been informed by the Athens code official that parking in front of this house is not allowed. There's simply nowhere for the parking spaces around this building. These circumstances do not apply to other properties in the area because they have adequate surrounding property or driveways for parking. Denial of this variance would definitely deprive me of reasonable use for this property. A denial would mean this property could not be used as a rental, nor would it be within the zoning code for a single-family home, so I cannot live in it myself. Strict application of the zoning code would would create a hardship in that this property could not comply with the code regardless of which one is used. Which use is requested. Granting this variance would allow reasonable use of this property. Granting this variance will in no way impair the supply of air or light to adjacent properties. Granting this variance will not increase congestion on public streets. Clark Street has adequate width to allow on-street parking. Granting this variance will facilitate continued ownership and maintenance of this property by a responsible owner, this appellant, which will have a positive impact on surrounding property values. This writer is unaware of if this variance would confer special privileges on this property. This property is one of 2 rental units on that side of the street for the entire block. The other rental unit has adequate parking in the rear of the building. The property to the east of my property is the side yard, so parking would not be an eyesore to my neighbors. As mentioned above, the surrounding properties have adequate property and off-street parking that appears to be in accordance with the zoning code. Again, I am requesting you grant a variance to allow on-street parking for this 2-bedroom rental unit. It's from Joseph Girolamo.
Okay. Any questions for our presenter?
Was this house for sale at one point?
Yes, he purchased this house approximately a year ago.
And he knew about these problems, right?
No, I did not believe he did.
If he stays with the single owner, then you won't have to be here.
Mhm.
But he's asking a variance for 2 parking spaces for a rental. Is that my understanding? But he
Yes.
said in his letter it would have an effect, and I am saying it wouldn't have an effect.
Correct.
If it stayed a single family, he would not even have to appear here.
Yes, correct.
Buy the house and have 6 cars. Lived there.
Yeah.
Is it, did they talk to the Methodist Church about leasing one of their parking spaces?
I don't believe they have any off-street parking.
Methodist Church has a variance for no parking.
I thought they had parking in the back or on the side.
Sheltering arms, no.
A sheltering arms.
They park at the code office.
Did you make any arrangements to park over by the code office?
If the owner wanted to occupy that house, he would be able to occupy. I mean, it's not so that even an owner couldn't occupy that house.
That's correct.
Okay,
There's no parking requirement going from owner-occupied to owner-occupied.
right.
It's just if you go from owner-occupied or non-rental to rental.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So the only alternative for this house is for the owner to live in it, or for the owner to sell it to someone else who will live in it.
Correct.
That's the only use for this property as it currently is set up by the Athens Code.
Unless she cuts down that tree.
No, it wouldn't be permitted to put, you'd have to get a variance to do that too. I know you hate trees, but even if you were going to put parking there, it wouldn't be sufficient for 2 cars.
It's not legitimate
You
parking.
couldn't do it. There's not enough room there.
It require a revocable license from council and a variance for parking in the front setback and in front of the structure. And it could also require a variance possibly for the width of the driveway.
So you'd have a whole lot more variances required to do that than to do what's currently being requested.
30 feet wide, in theory, you could park 3 cars across there right in front. But you're not allowed to park in front of the structure. You're not allowed to park on the right of way without a revocable license.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to have a driveway wider than 20 feet in this zone.
There's an electric pole and a guy wire there too.
Okay. Thank you. If we have
Thank
any
you.
more questions, we'll call you back. Now, there are some other people present. Is anybody here to speak in favor, in opposition, or in general comment about this case? No. Okay. Any other things that we need to be attending to, Steve, before we close the floor to comment?
No, just, again, to clarify, I think some confusing statements that have been made in several cases tonight. If you have a house with no parking or less than required parking and you live in it and you want to sell it to someone who wants to live in it, there's no retrofit parking requirement. That only kicks in whenever you want to rent.
it.
In 2003, what council did was they included in the parking regulations a category called dwellings. All other dwelling units, including units which have been newly constructed or newly converted. And newly converted is defined as converted from owner-occupied to rental. And that requirement is 1 for each permitted occupant, a minimum of 2 per dwelling unit.
Okay, and the idea being that if it were possible to create parking on site, then the owner should be required to create parking on site. But if it's not possible, what's not possible is not possible. And in that case, then you seek a variance.
Right. Two of the
Or you sell it to somebody, a family.
Yeah, I think 2 of the findings the board has to go through are practical difficulty and undue hardship. You can determine that there is some practical difficulty. You'll do that as you go through your discussion. The second finding you have to find is that there are exceptional circumstances pertaining to the lot that are not common to other lots in the area. So you're just going through, this is the first case tonight where you're just going down through your normal
Okay.
6 findings of fact.
Do you know if the real estate agents are required to explain things like that to a new buyer? Or?
I have no idea about real estate ethics. I'm not allowed to be a realtor.
You're not a contradiction of terms.
So I would think that myself, I'd be very upset if somebody sold me personally, I'd be upset if somebody sold me a property and didn't clarify the fact that I couldn't rent it. but that's just me personally. See what I'm saying? I can only speak that it's a violation of the law to try to rent something without parking.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different issue that my office doesn't get involved in that kind of thing. I would hope that every realtor in town, though, would. And as a matter of fact, most of them do. We have referrals. We have people come in the office all the time that want to pull out folders. Every place in town that has some legal nonconformity to it, it's noted in the rental file. And since 75% of the town's for rent, that's quite a bit of the housing stock. Realtors are using the code office as a resource all the time. So are potential buyers. So most people are taking advantage of the record, kind of the institutional knowledge of my office, and the local requirements. So this is not a very common situation, to my knowledge. Actually, I'd call it uncommon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Then we're ready to
We have to make a motion
craft
first.
a motion for the granting of the variance. Who's going to do that? Don't know, everybody volunteer all at once?
Okay, I move we grant a variance for case 07-07V, zone R1. The appellant is requesting a variance from section 23.08.01C and section 23.11, table B, off-street parking requirements to permit conversion of a structure to rental purposes with 0 off-street parking spaces, where 2 are required. Also note that 1 existing parking space at the premises is partially on the Clark Street right-of-way and partially in the front setback in front of the structure.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. This 1 parking space that currently exists, which is not a conforming parking space, if we do decide for a variance, should we should we append to this variance the requirement that the applicant go to the city council to get that parking place regularized?
I would have to do that anyway.
Not if we give them a variance to rent without a parking place. If we give them a variance to rent without a parking place, they don't have to do anything to get there.
They're still parking on somewhere that's the right of way.
Yep.
They'd still need a variance from city council.
Well, they need from us a variance, but if we give them a variance, they don't have to go to city council. Do I understand that correctly, Steve?
Well, let's go through the findings.
I noted it as 0 parking.
Right, that's how it's set up. It's for 0 parking. And if we want them to be able to provide parking and require that they provide it in that front setback area, then we have to state it in that way. And in order to state it in that way, they have to go to city council to get that done.
I think that would be a good way to clarify the record if that's the intention of the board. And someone could make a friendly amendment to add the condition that the appellant, the appellant has to approach city council to request a revocable license for use of the right-of-way for the existing parking space.
And a
The
revocable...
board will have already granted the variance. They'll, in effect, legitimize their use of public land
Yeah. But
for that
if
one spot that's there.
If we say a condition of the variance is that they go to city council to get a revocable license for the use of that front setback area for parking, then
No, for the right-of-way, not the front setback.
the city right-of-way for parking, that brings them a little bit more into some sort of compliance with city regulations, it seems to me. So,
Yeah,
thank
and the
you.
reason I pointed it out, too, another thing that I pointed out is that, I don't know, it's not really a spot on the street, it's not really a spot on the lot.
Yeah.
That's why I noted that one of the other nonconformities that it has is it's parking right in front of the structure that's not permitted also.
Yeah.
there's been discussion. I would say to this point, you've acknowledged that it's not legitimate for them to park, or I've at least brought it to your attention, that it's not,
That's
if
not a
this was
permitted
new,
parking area.
if this was new, you couldn't park in front. Right now, there is no section of the code that says, and if you convert to rental, you have to come up with the parking spaces, and they cannot be, in an improper or an illegal area. It's not that sophisticated. So this one's a little bit different.
Well, okay. I'll be more comfortable with it if we have them a bit more compliant. Because obviously people are going to park there. It's the,
Right.
Yeah.
It is a way to possibly at least legitimize that one spot.
Yeah,
And that will be at the option of council to do that.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to make that addendum to the motion, or,
I think you wrote it down kind of, so
Okay.
kind of read your little footnote there.
well, what the addendum I want is that the applicant, on receiving a variance, be required to complete it by going to the city council to request a revocable license for the parking in the city right-of-way, partially in the city right-of-way.
Could you repeat that, please?
A revocable license from city council
That the appellant
has to obtain it, yeah.
a variance or a revocable license, that the appellant, if the appellant.
If we, with this as part of the variance, I want it to be required that the appellant apply for and receive a revocable license from city council for parking in the city right-of-way, partially in the city right-of-way.
So if they couldn't get it, then this variance is void, right?
I think they'd need to come back if they couldn't get it from city council, and then we'd have to look at it again, is how I would see it.
Because the way it sounds right now, it's a condition
Yeah,
is that.
this is a condition for the variance. If you don't
We're
get it-
assuming that we're gonna give him one then, is that right?
We always assume that we're going to give him one. That's how we proceed. We proceed in a positive manner.
Motions are in the affirmative.
Yeah, it's always affirmative. So, okay. Then we may proceed with our findings. I'm comfortable. The first finding is whether there's a practical difficulty or undue hardship having to do with this property. And the property itself, not, the fact that the house pretty much covers the entire property is, and that there's no way that it can be any way larger, that in itself is a
Well,
hardship,
see,
I would say.
that's the special circumstances.
Well, it's the exceptional,
Yeah,
If it stays a one-home residency,
there could be no hardship then, yeah.
if it stays as a one-family residency, there's no hardship.
No hardship.
When you're trying to move it into a rental, there's a hardship.
it's a problem even as, to me, it's a problem even if it's a owner-occupied, because they're not, they don't have a place to park the car on that
Park on the
property.
street.
Well, they park right where they are right now.
It's not legal.
If they have been parking for, right near to the
Yeah.
code office.
But,
But it's legal non-conforming.
yeah, it's a legal non-conforming use. Okay, there's nothing about this property that's normal or regular or the way it should be,
That
and there's
satisfies
nothing
the-
that can
yeah.
be done about it because it was set up that way to begin with. Anyway.
Nonetheless, there is no hardship for the use of the property.
Somebody's been living there for several years without a problem, sounds to me like.
And it's sold within the past year, so it
Yeah.
can be owner occupied again. It's not as if it's been sitting
This
vacant
isn't
for
something that just
15,
happened
20
this
years.
year.
Well, it strikes me.
So it is
And doesn't it
sellable.
strike everybody here, but that's what makes horse races. Moving on to the next one, exceptional circumstances. The exceptional circumstances are conditions applying to the property or its intended use that don't generally apply to properties in the same zoning district.
Yes,
Uh,
that's true.
That one,
That satisfies it.
that satisfies everybody. This is not how the other places are. They don't generally apply to other properties in the same zoning district. Nobody else has a house that covers the entire property. Equal property rights. literal interpretation of the code would deprive appellants of the right to rent their houses, which is something enjoyed by others in the same vicinity. That's how I read it.
Well, I suppose if we give the variance, we are giving more privilege to this property.
No, everybody else in the neighborhood can rent their house if they care to.
Yes, but they conform, you know, they have the, maybe.
But it's a
They're
property
conforming
right.
property.
Yeah.
Is it not a property right to be able to rent or sell your home?
If
Well,
you,
it's
if you
two
sell
different
your
things.
home, no, but if you rent it, yes, you're
To sell,
converting
but
it
not to
from
rent.
one status to another.
Is it not a property right that's generally accepted for most property owners, that they'll be able to rent their property should they care to do it rather than live in it?
I don't
They can
think so.
always rent it to a family.
No, they can't.
No,
They can't rent it to
Rental's a rental.
anybody.
they can just,
It can't be
We
rented to
don't, we
anybody
don't track
because of the
Yeah, yeah.
circumstances.
related
Yeah.
persons.
But that was also probably brought up, and if it wasn't, I'm sorry, but in the purchasing of the home.
Could be. So they have less equal property rights is something that should have been told them when they bought their house.
You know, if it's a single-family dwelling, no problem. If they're talking about a rental, you got a problem.
Here we agree to disagree again. Minimum variance. Reasonable use of the property be made by, is this a minimal variance? Providing them to, with the opportunity to rent the house with one non-conforming space, where two is what would be required.
I mean, if it was one occupant, one car, maybe that would have been minimum, but
In
This
this
is-
case, that would be minimum, but in this case, it's not.
yeah.
They're wanting to rent to two people.
Well, two-
I
two.
should have asked before
Yeah.
whether or not the reason for asking for two is
Although
because they're
there's two,
planning
it's
to.
not even mentioned
a
anywhere
married-
here.
Well, Steve told us that they were planning to, they
But it's not in
requested for
here.
two.
Well, in other cases, haven't we asked them to maybe lease a parking space somewhere else? And we haven't
Certain
even
cases.
talked
We haven't
about that.
spoken of leasing parking.
There is no place. We sort of discussed
Code
that.
office.
There is no
Sheltering
place
arms,
that can't be
the church,
leased?
the-
He told me,
Come on, I
Within
don't know
250
that.
feet? I don't believe so.
he told me that the Methodist Church don't have, and I said, well, what about this parking space over
I
there?
heard that, but that still doesn't mean that there isn't any parking spaces available.
All right.
in
We're
the
gonna
area.
Because
get out of
this-
order
they
here.
haven't
And
asked for it,
Steve,
so
could
that
you
we
come back
shouldn't
up to the
probably-
podium for a second? We're sort of out of order, but is there, in your opinion, likely to be anywhere in the neighborhood within 250 feet, I believe is what it would have to be, of this house, where rental parking could be arranged?
The entire neighborhood is zoned R1, single-family residential, where parking is not permitted for anyone other than the resident of a property. On the other
Therefore,
side of
no
Curran
parking
Drive,
lots.
however, that's Zone R3, where parking lots are permitted. And so there is parking at the city water and sewer garage behind a locked gate. There's parking, there is a little bit of parking that's not behind the gate at water and sewer. At code office, there's a little bit of parking in front of the building and quite a bit of parking behind a locked gate. There's parking along Courier Street on property owned by American Electric Power. And there is parking in the R3 portion of West Elementary School. So if you're looking at 250 feet away where parking is permitted, it's AEP, the city, or the school.
So,
Could be parking at a greater distance than that. Probably the closest place, I don't know where the next closest place would be, where there might be some leased parking available. HDL Center possibly.
HDL Center.
The fairgrounds where the city leases parking. Those are the closest parking lots that I can think of.
okay, so they're not within 250 feet, but there are parking lots that could, where you could provide storage parking for
There is
somebody
no
renting.
requirement that lease parking be within 250 feet. That's a requirement where
That's
you
only
can get
for
an
the-
administratively issued permit if you have parking in same ownership and it's within 250 feet. But the board's kind of used that as a rule of thumb.
I see,
You know, if it's good for a deed-restricted distance, it's good for
other things.
a
yeah.
lease distance, but there's no requirement for lease
Okay.
parking to be at 250 or less.
Okay, then, it was point well
So they have an
made
option.
that there is that. Were they to continue, were we to continue this variance thing the way we're doing it, and then they don't have a variance, then they have to wait a year to come back to us?
If there's no significant change in the application, you
Would-
have to
would-
wait
would-
at least 1 year.
Would finding parking be a
significant.
significant change?
I think this would be a good time for the board to discuss, would they consider within less than a year a reapplication if they propose some lease parking at some location? That would be a significant enough change. You'd have to determine, and it's good that you brought that up,
Yeah.
is that a significant enough change that they can come back, say, the next meeting?
Yeah.
Sure.
Or is it not significant and therefore they have to wait at least 1 year?
Okay.
Oh, it is
So-
significant.
I think it would, are we generally agreed it would be significant enough?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
So give them a chance. and
Thanks,
that'll do
Steve.
that.
Okay.
Well, could we then just, instead of going on with this, table it, see if you would like to table it and take a month and see if he can come back with a 1-year leasing?
Well, I'll have to
rental contract?
re-advertise the case.
Excuse me?
I'll have to re-advertise the case.
Oh, okay.
If you remember at 108 Grosvenor,
Yes.
there was a discussion, the gentleman wanted to put in a driveway that was too narrow. During the course of the discussion that the board had, they said, well, can you lease some parking somewhere? And that was incorporated into the resolution of the board. The person who lived next door argued that the case had not been advertised as off-site parking. It had been
right.
advertised as a driveway that was too narrow.
Right.
So I recommend that you act on this application and then allow them to reapply.
Okay.
So I can re-advertise the case to adjoining property owners without any conflict
Okay.
about what the board was actually
We'll do that.
deciding that night.
We're almost through the bottom anyway, so thank you very much. Okay.
I'm supposed to err on
Yeah,
conservative and
we like conservative.
broadly advertised.
Okay, thank you. All right, we were going through minimum variance and, no, the minimum variance required to make reasonable use of the property. Absence of detriment, it must be determined the granting of the variance would not be a substantial detriment to adjacent properties. Nor impair the purposes of the code of the public interest. Comments?
There is no complaints, or there is no, I mean, there shouldn't be any problem. There's no
Were we
detriment.
to let them rent to two people without parking? Would there be detriment to the
Oh,
neighbors?
yeah.
Well, yeah, if there were two cars there,
2 more cars.
Well, 2 cars can even fit in there, so there's going to be maybe 2 renters. It's going to be always 1 car. There's, physically, there is no,
That's right.
yeah,
yeah.
there's not going to be any possibility for putting 2 cars in there.
On the other hand, we don't have any neighbors here complaining that
Yeah.
there's a problem. All right, and then not of a general nature, would the variance that they're seeking be better handled by changing the law? Well, the law was changed for just this purpose. So, unless somebody thinks differently, are we ready to vote on this one?
No.
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 No, there's one case that we didn't find was the hardship to me, so.
Well, it's not significant whether I vote yes or no, but I also vote no. The detriment part, I think, probably would wind up being a problem. So if you, however, could find some way to provide parking for at least one of the cars that they're wanting to, for one of the residents, it might make a difference. So, and we would be willing to hear the case again next month.
Would you suggest that I look at the HDL Center, or should I try to focus within the 250 feet?
Well, you might want to just get with Steve on that during the week.
And thinking in terms of the people using the parking, and the closer it is, the better, actually,
Yeah.
because, yeah, for their convenience, and they're more likely to use the parking that you provide for them if it's close enough to be useful.
And that doesn't have to be in the ownership of them, right?
Yeah.
That
No, it doesn't have to be,
could
it
a
just has to
leasing,
be
right?
Please.
leased, and you have to be able to provide, indicate to the code enforcement office that you have it, and it would have to be provided to them on an annual basis, but,
By the code office and deed restricted parking, in theory,
Has to be deed restricted.
because it's in permitted zone for parking and it's within 250.
See, yeah.
Sounds good.
So and only council, just so you know, only council approves use of public lands by revocable license. So if you want to lease parking from the city, you have to go to council and ask, say, rent spots at the code office for water and sewer. DEP, I don't know about you guys, I usually give an answering machine. And I'm not sure how you deal with the school. I guess you ask the superintendent.
Superintendent,
The school board.
they need
for
the
that.
money.
So
You'll just have to go out and
but
The city council is where I would go to ask about leasing.
Took a non-return.
Yeah, I'm tired.
to get, well, Steve seems to have it pretty well tied down where you would go to get parking from those various entities, so the code enforcement office would be able to help you there. And, yeah, hope you have good luck with that. Thank you.
You're gonna take the minutes from the last meeting?
Okay, well, last meeting, well, we need to do that next. Who had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting? Has everyone had a chance, and were there any corrections or
good to me.
additions to be put to the minutes? Would anybody like to move that we approve them?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Everyone agreed?
Yep.
Okay, well, then the minutes are approved, and that was the last thing we have to do, so we're adjourned. No, one last thing. We're still needing one more member on our board. This is a plea for anybody who's interested in what we did this evening and wanting to join us to make an application to the mayor's office. Okay, now we're adjourned.
Just so you know, that I think the mayor at his last neighborhood association meeting, which was last week, told the neighborhood associations also that we were looking for
Excellent.
someone for the zoning board. Right now, we have 2 people from the south, 2 people from Near East, 2 people from Far East,
Nothing wrong with
and
the
no
South.
West Side representation.
We need West Side representation. So West Siders, come on out.